Selloman Boxing. Like, subscribe, comment. So, Tszyu handily dismantles Brian Mendoza in Australia on Showtime Boxing. We're gonna put the spotlight on it. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Selloman Boxing. Blessings in the name of Jesus. So today we're reacting to the fight over the weekend, Tszyu versus Brian Mendoza. This was a solid win for Tszyu. And I must say, Tszyu gained my respect in this fight, okay? It was not a blowout. Tszyu didn't beat Brian Mendoza from the opening bell. It was highly competitive, but by like say round in the middle of round 6 and definitely round 7 on through 11, Tszyu dominated the fight. So it started off with back and forth between both guys. Brian Mendoza was shooting the double jab and creating an angle, which was kind of setting the pace of the fight, especially in the early rounds. That doesn't mean that Brian Mendoza was dominating, but his jab was setting the pace of the fight, okay? Tszyu did what I thought he was gonna do. He started applying pressure, but I was impressed by Tszyu's 1-2. Man, Tszyu has an excellent 1-2. We talked about it in the breakdown, the fight breakdown in my previous video, but Tszyu has an excellent 1-2, and he established it from the first round, all right? And he doesn't just throw the 1-2. What he does is he throws a hard jab, right? And it does a couple of things based on what his opponent is presenting. So he threw the hard jab at Mendoza, and what it did, I think the first 1-2 that landed, what it did when he threw the jab disrupted Mendoza's guard. It disrupted his guard, and what it did, when it moved his guard and actually broke his stance and threw him off balance a little bit, it created a clear path for the right hand. And he did it throughout the fight as well. If he threw the jab and Mendoza tried to parry it, then he would explode and land the 2, as the initial jab would remove Mendoza's hand from protecting his face and cause the right hand to have a clear path to land. So it was just great technical boxing from Tszyu. Brian Mendoza, from the opening bell, he was trying to be very aggressive. He was trying to throw more than one punch. He was throwing the double jab, left, right hand. And Tszyu really impressed me in this fight by his defense. He showed a great defense. It's like I was watching the fight and I was laughing, saying to myself, it almost seemed like Tszyu watched the video and tighten up his defense. I know he didn't do that. He probably just had a great training camp. But Tszyu's defense was on point. And that doesn't mean that he was moving his head all over the place. Even though he did move his head, he did bend at the waist to get away from Mendoza's left hook. You can tell he was prepared for Mendoza's left hook. But Tszyu, he made sure he kept his hands high, and he was catching shots on the gloves, he was parrying shots, he was blocking shots. And defense isn't just blocking, slipping, weaving. Defense is also your feet. So what Tszyu would do is, when Mendoza started to get aggressive, stepping in with punches, 1, 2, 1, 1, what Tszyu would do is just take shuffling steps backward, okay? Backward. And what that did, it made Mendoza's punches fall short. That was excellent defense. When someone is trying to throw combinations at you, taking a step back or two, right, makes their punches fall short. And by taking the target away from them, you actually start to frustrate them, and you limit their punch output to one at a time, because they know if they throw more than one shot, the shot is not going to land because you're not going to be there. So that's what Tszyu did. And once Brian Mendoza stopped moving as much, once Brian Mendoza stopped throwing combinations and trying to land one shot at a time, then Tszyu started to counter him. And Tszyu, he's very savvy, you know. He really impressed me in this fight, because what he would do, he wouldn't just throw the 1-2 to land. What Tszyu would do is he was really paying attention to Brian Mendoza's time to reset. Okay? So Brian Mendoza would be feinting, jabbing, all of that. And then after all that posturing, feinting, probing, throwing the jab, trying to counter, Mendoza would stop and put his hands up. As soon as Mendoza stopped and put his hands up, Tszyu would explode with the 1-2. He was catching him every time he tried to reset. Okay, so Tszyu just did great. And once Brian Mendoza started to get a little more stationary and stand in front of Tszyu, when he was starting to apply that pressure, Tszyu started to break him down with big shots using the jab. He caught him not just with the 1-2, but in the 7th round, Tszyu threw a jab, uppercut, right uppercut that hurt Mendoza. And Mendoza's he's a dog. He's like a Rottweiler. He's not gonna give up. And he actually survived the round after being visibly hurt by one of Tim's uppercuts, right? And Tim landed a few more big shots after that, but Brian Mendoza just had a ton of heart, and he would not give up. So after the 7th round, I was waiting to see what Tszyu would do in the 8th round. I was waiting to see if he was going to come out swinging for the fences with his chin in the air and no defense. But Tszyu came out there in the 8th round, and he started to establish his jab, hard jabs, jab to the body. And it just set the stage for the rest of the fight for Tszyu to dominate. Tszyu has excellent ring generalship. He places his shots very, 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 very well. He has a good lead right hand. Later on in the fight, he hurt Mendoza again, but it wasn't because his jab disrupted the guard of Mendoza. He hurt him because Mendoza, like we spoke about in the breakdown, Mendoza started slipping a lot of shots with his hands down. And what Tszyu did, he just waited for Mendoza to slip. He threw the jab, Mendoza slipped. And once he slipped, Tszyu had his eye on Mendoza's head where it went after he threw the jab, and he just threw it down the pipe, boom, and caught him on the chin. So Tszyu just showed a lot in the fight. He showed a lot in the fight. He showed a lot of skills. He showed a lot of savvy. He showed a lot of defense. As a matter of fact, Tszyu, he would get into this Mayweather-esque kind of shell, right? Where he would raise his left shoulder and put his left hand across his body while keeping his right hand covering. He kept his right hand high, and he would place his weight on his back foot. And every time Mendoza tried to engage, if Tszyu didn't step out of range, take a few steps back like we spoke about, Tszyu would get in that shell, and it would make Mendoza have a difficult time landing shots. Okay, so he just disrupted Mendoza's rhythm. He was more defensively responsible, and when it came time to get nasty and be violent, when he saw an opening, he just took advantage of every opportunity. So Tim looked good. I'm not discrediting Brian Mendoza. I think that he's a great fighter. I just think Tim was the better ring general. Tim was the better ring general, and he was just the better man. And I really think Tszyu, I don't think he's the best 154 pounder, but he's definitely up there at the cream. He's rising to the top as the cream of the crop in the division. So I would like to see him clean up a few things, Tszyu that is. There were times where he was landing the right hand, but his knees weren't bent. He was standing as straight up as the Statue of Liberty. So when he threw his right hand, at times he was actually leaning over his front foot because he wasn't balanced in his stance. Also, he gets squared up, especially when Mendoza got hurt and Mendoza was trying to exit at an angle. Tszyu was following him and landing the right hand, but he got squared up. If he's fighting someone that has great presence of mind, great boxing fundamentals, and stays balanced and in position to punch, he could put himself in a compromised position. But great win for Tszyu. I liked the energy that I saw in Australia, the Aussies supporting him. So after the fight, Tszyu called out Jermell Charlo. As we expected, they've been going back and forth for some time. And every time I see Tszyu fight, over the last year, I would say, every time I see him fight, the odds of Tim beating Jermell Charlo gets more and more possible. Every time I see Tim fight, he gets better. He's gaining more experience. I look at Jermell Charlo. I still kind of favor him to win, but it's getting closer to a 50-50 fight because the way Tszyu looked tonight against a formidable boxer with power, who can move well, who has a good jab, who was going to his body, I think he did an excellent job. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know how you thought the fight went. Break it down. Let me know where you think Tszyu needs to improve. Let me know what he needs to work on. For now, that's the Selloman Boxing Spotlight on the matter. Blessings.